Hi, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Żaneta. Day 5 in Seoul, and somehow we still managed to walk 14 kilometers. By this point, we had basically given up on using the subway. Our hotel was close enough to most places, so once again, we explored Seoul on foot. But more importantly, today was the day. My mission was almost complete. Visit every palace in Seoul. Our first stop was Daesugon Palace. After spending the last few days visiting royal palaces, I honestly wondered, would this one still feel special? Surprisingly, it really did. Unlike Gyeongbokgung or Changdaegung, which are mainly known for traditional Korean architecture, Daesugon combines elegant wooden palace halls with beautiful Western-style stone buildings. It feels like two completely different worlds meeting in one place. There were moments when I genuinely felt like I had somehow wandered back into Europe. That unusual mix of architectural styles is exactly what makes Daesugon different from all the other palaces in Seoul. Another thing I loved, it was much quieter. After dealing with crowds at some of the more famous palaces, it was refreshing to walk around slowly, enjoy the details, and actually take our time. The palace also houses Sukjeong Hall, one of Korea's first Western-style royal buildings. Today, it's a museum, and inside you can learn more about Emperor Gojong, the late Joseon period, and Korea's efforts to modernize during a time of big change. When it was built in the early 1900s, Sukjeong Hall represented Emperor Gojong's hope of modernizing Korea and bringing it closer to the Western world. Right next to it is Dokjeong Hall, another important building in the palace grounds. Inside, we found a small exhibition with two delicate flower-shaped artifacts. And there were also stamps you could collect, which made the visit feel a little more interactive. It was a really interesting place to step into, because it adds another layer to the palace beyond just the architecture. Daesugon became a royal residence in 1593, after the main palaces were damaged during the Japanese invasion. It later became closely connected with Emperor Gojong, the last ruler of the Korean Empire, who added many of the Western-style buildings we can see today. After visiting all palaces, I think each one really has its own personality. Gyeongbokgung feels grand and powerful. Changdaegung blends beautifully with nature. Changgyeongung feels calm and residential. Daesugon feels like a meeting point between Korea and the Western world. From Daeg Sugong's back gate, we followed Gojong's road, passed through a small park, and continues to the final stop on my palace checklist. It's interesting because these palaces are much closer together than I originally imagined. You can easily walk between many of them, which also explains why we ended up walking more than 10 kilometers every single day without really noticing. Before long, we arrived at the final palace on my list. One last palace stood between me and completing my soul mission. Built in the 17th century, Gyeongwaegon served as a secondary royal palace where kings stayed during emergencies or special occasions. Unfortunately, much of the palace was destroyed during the Japanese colonial period, but parts have since been reconstructed. This is probably the least visited palace in Seoul, and you can definitely feel it. Almost no crowds, lots of open space, a peaceful atmosphere. It wasn't the biggest, it wasn't the most impressive, but somehow it felt like the perfect place to finish our palace adventure. And with that, mission accomplished. We had officially visited every palace in Seoul. After all that walking, we took a short break at a cafe. Unfortunately, all the ice cream was already sold out, so cake had to do. Then, you probably already know what happened next. Yes, claw machines. Again. At this point, my husband simply refused to accept defeat. After spending far more money than we would like to admit, we somehow walked away with 6 or 7 Pokemon plushes. Well, technically, one of them was another gift from a very kind stranger. Honestly, people in Korea have been incredibly kind throughout this trip. Maybe they just understand how impossible these clothes machines really are. Dear Korea, you really need to come and study Taiwan's claw machines. In Taiwan, even beginners can win something. And if not, there is always a guarantee catch. I have won prizes with just $10, and Adrian also got cookies on his very first try. Here, I feel like you need a millionaire's budget just to have a chance. And don't even get me started on those adorable Ditto Pikachu plushes. We spent quite a bit trying to win one, and still went home empty-handed. One thing that really surprised us about Korean claw machines was how easy it is to lose track of your spending. In Taiwan, you feed the machines with coins. In Korea, many arcades use credit cards. At first, it feels really convenient. You just tap the card again and again, and somehow You have played 20 times before your brain catches up. For our last dinner, there was only one choice: Korean barbecue. And it absolutely lived up to the hype. The side dishes just kept appearing. Every time I thought they were finished, another plate arrived. Everything was refillable. After walking more than 10 kilometers every day, I like to think I earned it. Although, I'm pretty sure I still came home heavier. After dinner, we walked around Seoul Station one last time, looked through the shops, and slowly said goodbye to the city. On the way, we also passed a large protest with a heavy police presence. It wasn't something we expected to see, but it was a reminder that every big city has many different sides. The next morning started with one last hotel breakfast before packing our bags. Just before checking out, we noticed a ceremony taking place at Namdam Gate, right outside our hotel. Soon, it was time to head to Incheon Airport. One thing Adrian absolutely loved was the airport guide robot that offered to lead us to our gate. Of course, we had to follow it. Was it the fastest way? Definitely not. Was it fun? Absolutely. Before boarding, we also discovered a small hidden indoor garden, which turned out to be a peaceful place to relax before our flight. The flight back to Taiwan was smooth, and before we knew it, we were home again. 6 days had gone by incredibly fast. Before this trip, Seoul had been on my travel wish list for a very long time. And now that I have finally visited, I can honestly say it was worth the wait. One of the things I loved most was how easy Seoul was to explore. There were sidewalks almost everywhere, very few scooters, the city felt clean, and I always felt safe walking around. The subway system was also simple to understand, even for first-time visitors. For our family, this trip was filled with beautiful palaces, amazing food, kind strangers, thousands of steps, and somehow more Pokemon plushes than we had luggage space for. Speaking of unexpected souvenirs, somewhere along the trip, we adopted a tiny Munchlack plush. Since then, Munchlack has joined us everywhere. We took photos of it at the palaces and random spots around Seoul. Honestly, by the end of the trip, I think Munchlack had more vacation photos than the rest of us. Thank you for joining our family's first adventure in Seoul. If you enjoy exploring Korea with our Polish Taiwanese family, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next adventure. Bye!